We need to figure out who you are today, not who someone who was an authority figure 10 years ago believed you to be. So let's unpack all that. Let's evaluate it for validity. Let's reform it, and let's see if we can expand your field of possibility. Yeah.
Welcome to the Gig Boss Podcast, where musicians go to learn how to navigate the new music economy. My name's Adam Meckler, and it's my mission to get you the tools to have a thriving career in music. And to that end, I have smooth jazz and funk saxophone master Steve Cole on the show today. Not only does Steve have a decorated career as a top-tier performer with an album still riding the tops of the Billboard Smooth Jazz charts, he's also a professor who specializes in the business of music. And he's got a killer Spotify presence with a handful of songs that have streams in the millions. And I just had the distinct pleasure of performing 2 nights at the Dakota in Minneapolis with Steve and his killer band. Steve, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me, man.
Awesome to be here, dude.
All right. So, hey, you broke onto the scene in 1998. I've been listening to Stay a While. It's so funky, man. It's such a great record. It had multiple #1 hits and sort of catapulted your career. Can you talk a bit about how that record came about? And I read that you worked with a producer on it. Is that right?
Yeah. So that record was many years in the making.
Yeah.
Your first record you work on your whole life, right?
Right.
But I had been touring around with a couple of artists that were already signed to Atlantic Records. The first was a guy named Bob Mamet, and this was kind of in the early '90s. And then I met Brian Culbertson. We all lived in Chicago at the time. And was touring with him and got to know a bunch of people through that relationship. Mm-hmm. Brian actually, was cool enough to say, hey, you know what, you should think about doing your own thing, And he helped me do that. We wrote a bunch of music together. We did one demo together, and it kind of got, let's just say not the most enthusiastic response.
Sure.
And, we kept kind of at it. I kept touring with him, and he kept on helping me kind of develop my thing. And, it's interesting. I can narrow it down to like one song, which is actually on the Stay a While record. It's called Where the Night Begins. We wrote that together. And it just so happened that George Knopfel, who is the head of A&R for the kind of contemporary jazz area at Atlantic Records, was in town. We had dinner with him and played him this track, and he kind of looked across the table. He's like, "Yeah, man, I think that's the move. I think you're ready."
Awesome.
So it was years.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It wasn't just like, hey, man, I've got whatever million streams on Spotify, sign me. No, it was a long time. But yeah, that's how it all started, man.
Cool. Yeah. So I was gonna ask if how much you were grinding before that first record came out, or if you had released other records and they just you pushed them away, or if that was really the first big one.
That was the first one. I was more of just I was playing clubs. I was playing, jobbing dates, doing a lot of sessions. The session scene in Chicago is pretty vibrant in that time period. So I was just grinding it out, man, as a side man, as a session guy, and then started touring. It kind of just branched off from there. So
what was the touring like once the record came out and you started getting some traction? How hard did you go touring? Well, as hard as we possibly could. I mean, here's the thing. I got signed in 1998, which was just a couple of years before the Napster apocalypse, right? Right.
And the record industry was at its highest level of revenue, so it was like a dream come true for 5 minutes. Had a lot of support from Atlantic Records. The album was a priority. I had great relationships with the people there, the people who were kind of handling marketing and promotion and publicity. I really had very, very, very close friendships with them. And so, yeah, we were just, we were rolling pretty hard as much as we possibly could. Some of the gigs were fantastic. One of the first gigs was back in the day, the Goodwill Games in Battery Park. I played like right before Trisha Yearwood.
Wow.
It was like this weird eclectic thing, but then the next day was at like the Taste of Cleveland.
Yeah,
and it rained.
Yeah, sure.
So we're like covering up gear. I mean, it was like all over the place. But really a fabulous few years of very, very heavy touring. Really, really kind of set things off.
So you had that great relationship with Atlantic. What happened over the course of 20 years? Like, how did your relationship with major labels change now that the economy and the way things work in the music business is so different?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit unique in that, especially in this day and age, is that I still am affiliated with record labels, and I have been throughout my entire career. I started out with Atlantic Records, then kind of got traded to Warner Brothers, and then I actually was dropped from Warner Brothers around the Time Warner AOL merger, and I was on the beach for a minute, wondering what my next move was, and. It's funny enough, I got into higher education, and right when I accepted a position as a professor in music industry at Columbia College in Chicago, I got another record deal. Huh. And this time it was with first Narada, which was then acquired by EMI and was folded into Blue Note. So I made a couple of records for Blue Note.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I ended up going with an independent label that was kind of aggressively signing a lot of the refugees from major labels. And that's Mac Avenue.
Oh, yeah, I know Mac Avenue, yeah.
Yeah, so I've been with Mac Avenue for like 12 or 13 years. And they're absolutely fantastic. It's funny because there were some people I work with at Mac Avenue that I used to work with at Warner Brothers.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so, yeah, it's been a really great experience there.
So do you do any kind of, I know some of the record labels I work with, there's like a community of artists. There's a Slack channel where like artists are like, this worked, this didn't, this venue has been responding to my emails, this venue hasn't. Rope-a-Dope Records is a record label I work with out of Philadelphia. Does Mac Avenue, I know like Sean Jones has released records on Mac Avenue, great trumpet player, Tia Fuller.
Yeah.
Have you interfaced with any other artists on the label in any kind of significant way?
You know what? Some of the artists on the label I knew before, notwithstanding our affiliation with the label. What you're talking about is would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any process in place for doing that, but note to self.
Yeah, right.
that would be amazing to just be able to, kind of, jump on a platform and say, hey, whatever. Hey, Christian McBride, how are you?
Yeah, totally, man. Like, why isn't that a thing,
And he would be like, I'm sorry, and you are?
Get out of here, man. Yeah, so I remember hearing a thing, I don't remember exactly how it went, but Questlove was talking about when they first got signed, and he was like, he told the label, you got to also go sign this person, this person, this person, this person, and this person, so that our sound can be defined, you know what I mean? So the label became like a place you could point to and go, anybody that plays like the Roots or has that kind of like neo-soul vibe, it's like they're here at this label, Mm-hmm. That kind of like creating community thing I think is really interesting for labels. I know a lot of labels don't do it. Rope-a-Dope does a good job of it, but whatever. It's a smaller, super indie.
Yeah. I think that's a phenomenal idea. I think it would help labels kind of form stronger value propositions around what they're doing and how they're serving their artists. I mean, I think a lot of labels do a phenomenal job of doing that. But I think more and more today, community is becoming so critical, especially kind of in the creative sector, that having that hub would be just invaluable.
Yeah, cool. So listening to your records and then getting to like play a live show with you, is there a way that you approach playing like your saxophone on records versus when you're live, and why are those two things different if they are?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I can't say that I consciously think about a different approach to saxophone playing live and in the studio. That said, I think there's a discernible difference. In the studio, it's much more cerebral, focusing, on a number of different things. First of all, when I'm recording, the experience of playing that song is pretty new, you know? And so not only am I kind of, trying to, not screw up, and really focus on, making a great performance, but I'm also kind of exploring a bit about like, all right, so, this is kind of the melody as I envisioned it when I wrote it, but now I'm actually playing it on my instrument, and I have to translate that idea that was in my head into the medium of this instrument.
Right.
And every instrument, has its thing, and some things you hear in your head don't really translate 100% to your instrument.
No doubt
right?
about it. Yep.
So there's a lot of that going on. Live, it's almost like I lose myself in the moment live, because there's so much energy and it's so much fun, and I'm surrounded by humans,
Yep.
Very, very creative and amazing human beings playing instruments. And I think it's just like a more powerful, more just kind of like from the hip, let's go, let's do it.
Yeah. And you mentioned when we were hanging, you mentioned like being on tour and having kind of a broken down band that's a little smaller and playing to tracks versus having like the full, like we did in Minneapolis, where we had like most of the pieces or all the pieces on the record. What's that experience like playing to a track versus playing? I think I know, but like, what's, it's like.
You know what, man? For a while, it was very much just a necessity.
Yeah.
So here's an example of how the business has changed a bit. When I started out touring, not only did I have a full band with a couple of keyboard players, and I also had background vocalists. I had 3 background singers.
Yeah, nice.
And a tour manager. There were 9 of us rolling together.
Awesome.
9 airfares, 9 salaries, 9 per diems.
Yep.
And many times, a bar tab of 10 people, including myself.
Yeah.
The economics of touring got a little bit tighter, and sometimes you can't afford to bring out so many people. It's just it's cost prohibitive. So playing with a track became a fact of life. I absolutely hate it. It's not like it spoiled the entire experience for me, but there's just this freedom that's just simply not there.
Yep.
With that track, you're really, really confined. Now I know that some people have been really amazing with like putting tracks in Ableton and being able to trigger and loop. That's a whole skill set that I would love to develop, but I still, in performance, it's just another thing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having an actual person on the road who does that might not be a bad idea.
Right. Yeah, man. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your music, like your writing and your influence from being from Chicago. You talked a little bit about Curtis Mayfield when we were on stage. It's like I played with this band that did a tune that was inspired by Curtis many years ago, and I never went and checked out Curtis Mayfield. It was like that wasn't a thing that I had checked out. And so in the last 3 months since like listening to your music and hearing you talk on stage, I've been listening to Superfly and a couple other things, and I'm curious like how the music of Chicago, like Chicago style funk, soul, blues, worked its way into your music, and how that's different than say somebody that was making like smooth jazz kind of stuff out of a different city.
Right. So
I hear it, I can hear the difference.
Yeah, no, it's palpable. I mean, Chicago is such an amazing city in that, well, first of all, a lot of the same musicians are playing a lot of the same music. So, like, if you're in kind of a scene with different players, they might be playing the blues clubs on Wednesday, jazz clubs on Thursday, funk and R&B and soul, other days, gospel gigs. And it's just, I found myself kind of welcomed into this community of musicians, and I got to experience and play and learn about so many different styles of music in so many different venues and genres. And it just became this big like paella, this big stew,
Yep.
And it was just an inspiring place to grow as a musician. And so just kind of naturally, and I also studied classical music. I mean, I came up formally studying classical music.
Right.
So it was all there. And, you know, the cool thing about that is there's so much source material there for you to kind of find your own voice. Like how do I want to combine these things in a unique way that's mine? You know,
right.
Of course, after many, many years of imitation.
Right? Yeah, right. I was just looking at that Clark Terry quote where he says imitation, assimilation, innovation, in that order, right? Something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was just all there, man. It was like all the ingredients, and I got to experience it all. I got to learn from some incredible musicians. And it was just such a welcoming environment.
Cool. I want to talk a little bit about CDs. CDs has been something that's been talked about lately in my social circles, where people are going like, we're at this impasse, right, where it's like, if you're going to do publicity, maybe it's like, yes, for sure, print some CDs, because people who do radio, people who maybe work with jazz, maybe trend a little bit older, and so they're still using CDs, or there are record labels that I work with that have like a network of people that sell CDs still. It's low, you know, we're talking like in the hundreds, but it's like people are still buying CDs. Where do you find yourself as an artist when you're releasing a new, like you just had this new album? What did you do for digital versus physical and like how did those numbers go? Maybe even compared to what you did in like 98 with Stay Awhile.
Yeah, I mean, you know, let's face it, you know, in 98, people were buying CDs.
Yeah.
And they were buying a ton of them. You know, these days we still make CDs. You know, my label still puts out CDs because most of where I sell them are at shows. People still want them. They want to stand in line. They want you to sign something. They want to take something home.
Yep.
I actually think that CDs are having a little bit of an uptick in terms of sales as of late. But I think that, you know, and you know, a lot of artists I know are now really, really kind of focused on making sure they have vinyl available.
Right.
You know, streaming and digital is still probably, you know, 90% of where the focus lies. Building engagement, you know, building profile, you know, finding ways to connect through the mediums that people, you know, discover music, which is, you know, streaming today.
Yep.
But still, there's that physical aspect, that kind of, you know, piece of collateral that people can hold, can you know, use as something to remember and experience by. And also, you know, my audience tends to be a little bit on the older, you know, kind of spectrum of the demographic. And, you know, people still dig their CD collections, man. They like to take them home, put them in their car, you know, on the way home, you know, and you know, rock out. So
yeah. And there's really like, you know, I grew up with like one foot in saving money to buy the CD you want, and one foot in, like, I remember being upstairs at my house and watching my brother download all this music on Napster on our family computer, and I was going like, how are you getting all this music? What's going on? Like, I remember the feeling of that and being excited and being like, wow, all this music is accessible, and not really understanding the implications of that. Man, I don't even know where I was going with this, but, you know, are you focusing on streaming now? Like, how are you handling the digital space?
Yeah, I'm you know, a lot of my focus is on social media and building engagement with fans, and, you know, growing my you know, my engagement with like not yet fans.
Yep.
And getting impressions on streaming. You know, I don't do a whole lot of like, hey, go and buy my CD. Even though, of course, you know, you buy a CD and there's like more money in it than there is in a stream.
Yeah.
But let's face it. I mean, when you look at the percentage of revenue that the industry derives from streaming versus physical, it's a pretty easy prioritization.
Yeah. And I remember what I was going to say. Liner notes, man. Liner notes. I would sit and read every single record. I'd read all the liner notes, figure out who's playing on the record.
Yep.
Read the, you know, it's like, this was a great, and it's like, we've got some digital versions of that now, but it's really not fully integrated yet in the way that it was, you know?
Yeah, I mean, just recently I was listening to a track by an artist, and I wanted to know who produced it because I was just like, wow, this is killing. I probably spent a half hour trying to figure it out. Couldn't find it.
It's ridiculous.
That was really frustrating. Yeah, so I feel you on that.
Yeah. So you're in higher education. You said you started at Columbia. Now you're in Minneapolis. Where are you at again? St. Thomas? Is that
University of St. Thomas. Yeah.
University of St. Thomas. So Biden just announced this $10K forgiveness thing, 20-some K if you have Pell Grants. I'm learning about it. I've got $130,000 in student loans. I have 2 music degrees. I have sort of reached like the top position you can reach at a university as a jazz person, and I still can't really pay my student loans off. Like, I still don't make enough money to pay my student loans off. So my question to you is it irresponsible for higher education to be giving out music degrees, just since it's topical?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that that's a good question. Is it irresponsible? Let me approach it from this perspective. A responsible music degree, in my view, would need to contemplate much more than what a traditional music degree has contemplated in the past.
Yeah.
I think that musicians today have an incredible opportunity in a creator economy that's growing, as fast as it is. I mean, it's not hard to identify even players that we know who are really, really adding a significant amount of income to their portfolio.
Yep.
By offering, doing, creating, right? Mm-hmm. So of course the craft is key, right?
Yep.
But also, I mean, if you're not equally addressing where the professional opportunities are, how to be entrepreneurial, how to understand your audience and engage with them in a meaningful way. Yep. And I'm not just talking about social media strategy. I'm talking about like human-centered design, building empathy, understanding, the deeper kind of levels of your audience's needs.
Right.
Also understanding strategy and marketing and differentiation, and also agility. And, when the world changes around you, are you prepared to change with it?
Right.
Or are you going to be paralyzed by the fear that comes with change? So, if a music program is not addressing in a very significant way the industry around the art, and I'm not just talking about dabbling in it. I'm not talking about, hey, well, we have a class. No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
There needs to be a significant part of the curriculum that addresses this, because there are probably 3 schools in the world where you can go to, maybe not in the world, Europe's a little bit different with music, but
yep.
If you go to Juilliard, you're probably going to be a badass. You're probably going to find that, that 0.1% of the jobs in the world that you can do just by doing your thing.
Yeah.
Or Curtis, or you know what I'm saying, right?
Yep.
For the rest of us mortals, we need to be fortified in this aspect of the world and the context in which music and creativity lives, or else we're not doing this. So, to go back to your question, if that's not happening, then yeah, I think it's irresponsible to be offering a music degree.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
If that's not happening. If it is, double down. Create great entrepreneurs, great artist entrepreneurs.
Right. Storytelling, I feel like, is such a big part of that aspect. You sort of touched on that a little bit, but man, I've been thinking a lot about storytelling and releasing records, and I'm trying to get better at that myself I've got another record coming out soon that's where I'm having producers sample my big band music and turn it into new songs, like beats and stuff.
Cool.
And then I'm doing collaborations with a bunch of different artists. And I wanted to come up with an idea that I can say that quickly. that I can just be like, this is what the project is, and everybody can go, oh, cool, that's interesting. You know what I mean? It's like the story behind the thing is such an important aspect of just being able to, like, you're going to work with a publicist, so the publicist needs a story to tell, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. So what are you telling your students that are going out into the world to make a career in music? Are you saying, like, there's all these various different avenues to make a living, or you have to be... you have to have your fingers in a lot of different income streams that they come in. Like, I'm assuming some of them will become artists. Some of them will probably be industry people.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm a big fan of is doing experiments early and often. A lot of students come to school and they don't know what they want to do, man. They have this one idea, right?
Yeah.
Like, I want to be a producer. I want to own a label. I want to work for a festival promoter. I want to be, you know, whatever, a singer, whatever, singer-songwriter, whatever you want to do. And that's great. You know, you gotta get there somehow. Mm-hmm. You know, something creative needs to be driving you.
Right.
The one thing that I make sure that I do, and I use some, actual theory, some actual, social science methods to expand my students' idea about what's possible for them.
Yeah.
The one thing that I know for sure is that a lot of students come to college their first year and their head is filled with all of the assumptions that they have formed uncritically throughout their entire lives about where they begin and where they end. Right? And one of the big things that I do is just like, hey, you're here now, and we need to figure out who you are today, not who someone who was an authority figure 10 years ago believed you to be, and so you just bought into that, right? Yep. So let's unpack all that. Let's evaluate it for validity. Let's reform it, and let's see if we can expand your field of possibility. That's one of the first things that's so critical.
Yeah.
And then you see, people's eyes light up, like, and again, stories. I have tons of stories about who I thought I was, and who I actually became. And if I would have listened to those assumptions, from back in the day, I wouldn't have done, 90% of the things that I've done. Mm-hmm. The other thing that, I do is we start talking about professional development literally from day one. And, we do have a class that happens like freshman year. It's called Entrepreneurial Careers in Music and Professional Practice.
Cool.
And part of it really is to just kind of start understanding goals, start understanding processes, start understanding assumptions and possibilities, but then also, like, how can we test different things? How can you go and do something and see if you actually like doing it? Not like get a job, not like get an internship, but like put something out in the world and check it out.
Right.
And experience what it means to whatever, that thing is. And we do it a lot because the more you experiment and the more that you try and test, first of all, the more comfortable you get with the process. And two, you explore and you discover so much more in a much more truncated, period of time.
Yeah.
So, it starts there. And then, of course, building into, I'm a big proponent of design thinking and applying that to creativity and the creative economy. Really starting with the people and not the problem.
Right.
And not starting with the solution, but starting with questions.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we design experiences. That's our job as creatives. Whatever you do, whether you're a touring artist or whether you're, a festival promoter, you're creating experiences.
Yep.
And you're creating experiences for people.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't think that way. A lot of artists don't think that way. They're just like, I'm just going to make the music I make, and if you like it, cool. And if not, then f you or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, like, people are paying to come see us and to have an experience, to be entertained, right? It's like, what are we doing to fulfill that?
And I'm not a proponent of just simply, tailoring your music and your craft to whatever, market research you do.
Yeah.
It's more about kind of like, how can you bring your music and your creativity and your voice to as many people as you possibly can by knowing more about how your music connects with those people who are already following you. What does your music mean to them? And how can you tell that story in a more compelling way?
Yeah.
And create experiences around what you do that are articulated with what you learn from your audience.
Right. So are you using any kinds of tools that help with that? I mean, I've been hearing about bands in town recently and how it's a great resource for artists, and Chartmetric. I had a guy on who works for Chartmetric recently, which kind of tracks all your various different interaction with fans throughout social and streaming platforms. Are you personally using any tools like that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Chartmetric, and we use that at University of St. Thomas a lot because I think there's an incredible amount of insight to be gained from a dashboard that has so many different data points that you can kind of see trends. And I love the feature where you can just like go on your dashboard and you can see all these different metrics from all these different social media platforms and streaming platforms, and everything is articulated. You move the needle on one thing and you see a trend and you see what's going on with the entire panel, which is really cool. So I use that for insights. I use all of the analytics that I possibly can from any platform that I'm on. So whether it's Pandora, and Next Big Sound and Spotify Analytics, Amazon Analytics, Apple Music Artists. The one thing that's confusing is that a lot of them tell a very different story, right? I mean, you go and you look at your numbers on Apple Music and you go and look at your audience on Spotify, and you may see some very conflicting, stories in the data. And trying to understand, well, all right, who are we talking to, in going deeper into like, well, who's an Apple Music listener and who's a Spotify listener, and what's the profile there? Yeah. So it gets a bit complicated. I'm actually encouraging my students at St. Thomas to minor in analytics if they feel like that's something that they connect with.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
because we're the ones dealing with it, right? It's not record labels anymore. It's like we're indie artists dealing with it.
Right. So understanding really how to understand data, how to tell stories with data, how to visualize data so it starts to make sense. Yep. Not only is it good for your own practice to understand what's going on with your fan base, but it's also really critical if you want to engage with another area of the industry, like you want to get a gig, right? Yep. You go to a promoter and you're like with no data about you. Mm-hmm. And just your good looks, and it's not going to happen. But if you actually can tell a story and you have some metrics to back it up, even if it's not astronomically awesome, if you can show a trend, if you can show growth, and understanding, and also the fact that you're a strategic partner as opposed to just somebody looking for a gig, you might have better luck.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's so great. What are you up to now creatively? What do you have going on?
Right now, I'm actually really trying to level up the kind of online engagement. I was taking a break from the road. I mean, COVID was obviously kind of a forced hiatus. Yep. But I actually, after touring for like 30 years, was it 30? Holy crap. Maybe it's 25. Maybe I'm not that old. Yeah. And really kind of just so much a part of my everyday. Just, I know that I'm going to be on a plane this week, no matter what. Right. Felt great to be home, mm-hmm. So I extended that little vacation for a while, very purposefully. But anyway, really trying to kind of level up the online engagement and create more content, because it's just kind of something I really enjoy doing. Yep. But also, starting to plan to, ease back into, live music, and playing gigs without tracks.
Yes. So Smoke and Mirrors is out, the new record. We're going to link Steve Cole's music in the description of the podcast. Check out what Steve is doing. It's killer. Dude, this was awesome. Thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure. I'm flattered to be asked to be on your podcast.
All right, man. Cool. We did it. Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Steve Cole. If you want to get deeper into this thing, you can jump over to the Gig Boss Podcast Facebook group. We discuss all the topics that we encounter on the podcast. We also have an app called Gig Boss. It's an organizational tool for musicians, for band leaders. You can create groups, you can create events, you can track all your events in a chronological scrolling feed of gigs. You can click on a gig and see all the details, click on the address to pull up Uber or Lyft or your native Maps app on your phone, and a whole bunch of other new stuff is coming. The Gig Boss app is free on iOS and Android. We also have a deal going on with Ari's Take Academy, where if you take one of their courses, you can get 10% off by putting in the code GIGBOSS, GIGBOSS. BOSS. They offer courses on sync licensing, on running ads for your music, and all kinds of other useful stuff. All that stuff is in the description. Thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot. I can tell that we're growing. I can tell that new people are finding us. I appreciate you being here.